Hi friends, welcome to Political Science and International Relations. In this lecture, we are going to understand the concept comparative politics by analyzing a case study. We will take the example of India and China. We will compare the two states to understand comparative politics in a practical manner. In a separate lecture, I will be explaining the concept and topic comparative politics in detail. We will discuss the scope of comparative politics, the approaches within comparative politics, the methods in comparative politics, and the application of comparative politics in the present world. We will be doing this later. It will be an elaborate video. In this video, we will understand the concept of comparative politics briefly, and we are going to study the application of comparative politics practically by a case study, which is India-China comparison. So this will be very helpful for you to understand the scope of comparative politics and its practical application. Okay friends, what is comparative politics in the first place? As the name suggests, comparative politics is about comparison of politics. Okay, now the question arises, what is politics? Politics is related to power. Whenever there is a pursuit for power, there will be politics. Society is arranged in a hierarchical manner based on power. A person may have more power in the society, another person may have less power. So when you look at the society, you will see a power differential, and there will be pursuit for power among people as well as different groups. So whenever there is such a situation, you will see politics. Many of us are of the view that politics is only seen in the public sphere. We see politics through elections, political parties, states, and international relations. But in reality, politics is everywhere. The feminist Kate Millett told that whenever there is a power structure relations, there will be politics. It is true. Politics is present in family, it is present in school, it is present in office, it is present in political parties, it is seen through elections, it is seen at the international level, because countries, that is states, compete with each other for power. So politics is largely related to the concept power. Politics is also related to decision making. People take decisions. This is included under politics. Thirdly, politics is also related to distribution of resources. Okay. So these aspects are included under politics. Comparative politics studies about politics. Now, within politics, what is being compared? Under comparative politics, you can compare states. One state can be compared with another state. State is an institution. So institutions can be compared. Okay. Different systems can be compared. For example, federalism is a system. You can compare the federalism of one state with the federalism of another state. For example, we can compare federalism in India with federalism in US. Apart from this, we can go for comparison within a state. We can take India, we can go for comparison within India based on a concept. For example, we can compare federalism within India before 1989 and after 1989. So we are comparing across time. Okay. We can compare between states, we can compare institutions, we can go for vertical comparison within one state, we can go for different types of comparison. Comparison can be done between political philosophies and ideologies also. Comparative politics broadly consists of two approaches. The first approach is called the traditional approach. It was followed for a long time. Aristotle can be called the father of comparative politics. The other approach is called modern approach. Aristotle compared many constitutions of the ancient Greek states 2000 years ago. That is why he is seen as the father of comparative politics. Comparative politics emerged as a major domain within political science around 1950s and 60s. There are some reasons for this. At the time, liberal democracy was upheld and celebrated as the most successful political model, and the Cold War was going on. Third world countries had to choose between liberal democracy and socialism. Apart from this, behavioralism emerged as a important approach within political science. David Easton, he contributed to behavioralism. Behavioralism is used under the modern approach. This also contributed to comparative politics. Traditional comparative politics uses some approaches. The important ones are institutional, legal, philosophical, and historical. These are the important ones. Traditional approach is largely related to values, norms. Okay, that is why it is called normative approach. It has more to do with philosophy. It asks questions. It takes into account philosophy and ideology. It takes into account values. This is traditional approach. The other approach is modern approach. Modern approach embraces science. Scientific methods are used. Modern approach is empirical. Okay, it is empirical. It goes for observation. It wants evidence. It is not just happy with values, norms. So this is the difference between traditional approach and modern approach. Okay, so modern approach is a factual study of political phenomenon. It is an empirical approach. Traditional approach largely value based. In the present times, scholars are progressively going for modern approach. In the past, scholars were mainly sticking to traditional approach. Many of the scholars, right from Aristotle, they gave importance to institutions. They gave importance to norms. They gave importance to philosophy. They gave importance to constitution. So constitution itself is an institution. Let's take an example. If you want to compare two countries with respect to the political system, let's say, using traditional approach, invariably we will look into the constitution of the two countries. We will compare constitution of country A with constitution of country B. We will look into the law. Legal aspect is also important. This is how we compare using the traditional approach. But modern approach is more practical. It wants evidence. It observes. It wants to see the reality. It wants to see how things works. Okay, so this is the most important difference between the two approaches. The scholars who went for traditional approach actually did not write any books in the name comparative politics. It is very unique. They told that they were doing comparative politics, but they did not write any authoritative book on comparative politics. Only in the recent past, scholars following the modern approach started writing books on comparative politics. Macredis is a very important scholar. Macredis, David Apter, these are some important scholars following the modern tradition of comparative politics. In fact, they were the ones who declared that they were actually doing comparative politics. They were comparing politics. Okay, now what can be compared in comparative politics? We can compare states with each other. So what can be compared? We can compare states. We can compare political behavior. We can compare political institutions like governments. These can be compared. Institutions like local bodies can be compared. Provincial governments can be compared. These are nothing but institutions. We can also compare political ideologies and find out how they manifest in the form of systems and institutions. So many aspects can be compared in comparative politics, which is a subfield of political science. A scholar going for comparative politics should be objective. She should be neutral. She should not be having value judgments in her mind. For example, if a scholar is already having the opinion that liberalism philosophy is the best philosophy and that liberal democracy is the best form of government, then she has already decided that liberalism and liberal democracy is the best form of politics. Naturally, she will not be able to do comparative politics properly. Okay, so such scholars have already taken an institution into account. They have already judged based on some values. This is not the correct approach for studying comparative politics. One should be objective. One should be ready to analyze reality. One should be able to accept the truths. Only then you can do comparative politics properly. After Second World War, many scholars upheld liberal democracy as the best form of government. Francis Fukuyama, he hailed liberal democracy as the best form of government. He in fact told that we are now seeing the end of history because liberal democracy has been attained and liberal democracy is the best form of government. Socialism has failed, so there is no need for any further form of political system in future. But such views don't reflect reality. Got it? As a result, traditional approach alone is not enough for comparative politics. We also need modern approach. Okay, so when you go for comparative politics, ensure that you are using both the approaches. Both are very important. In fact, modern approach is very important today. Using modern approach, you can see the reality. You can contextually study. You can practically study. You will get to see new insights in political science. Okay friends, now let's practically go for comparative politics, taking the case study of India and China. We are now going to compare India and China using traditional approach and modern approach. We have taken the two states, India and China. Now let's compare the political systems in the two states, India and China. Let's go for traditional approach first. Traditional approach takes into account legal, philosophical, institutional and historical. As such, it gives importance to the constitution of the states. China has an unwritten constitution. India has the lengthiest written constitution in the entire world. It doesn't matter what is the nature of the constitution, but both states have constitutions. Am I correct? So traditional approach in comparative politics will definitely take into account constitution of both India and China. Make sense? Am I right? Secondly, it takes into account philosophy, ideology. It takes into account norms, values, ideas. Okay. Now let's compare India and China based on these aspects. When you look at the constitution of India, India is called as democracy. Am I correct? So you see Indian state being seen as a democracy through constitution. It is seen as a democracy in terms of philosophy as well. Now coming to the other side, China is not considered a democracy. This is the general opinion. The reason is, when we compare two countries based on the concept and institution democracy, the standard we tend to take under traditional approach is actually liberal democracy. So when we take into account liberal democracy as a system and as a philosophy, what is a general view, almost universal view? That India is a democracy and China is not a democracy. So one can immediately come to a conclusion using traditional approach that India has democracy and China does not have democracy. But if you look at the constitution of China, China tells that it is a socialist state under the people's democratic dictatorship. I have written the important keywords in the Chinese constitution. I have not exactly written as it is found in the constitution of China, but this is how Chinese constitution defines China. It tells that it is a people's democracy, people's democratic dictatorship. So China will tell that it is a people's democracy. See, when you take into account traditional approach, we have already taken liberal democracy as the guideline, as the standard. China's constitution tells that it is a people's democracy, but we do not accept it because this is taken as the benchmark, it is taken as a standard. So we don't compare China's people's democracy as a real democracy, but we accept India's democracy as a real democracy. Is it not? Indian democracy is the largest democracy in the entire world. Right. But is this enough for us? Does the traditional approach of comparative politics give us all the answers? It does not give us all the answers. We have to go further. Here is where modern approach comes into play. Modern approach does not take into account only norms, values, ideas, and philosophy. It also takes into account processes. Okay? It takes into account results. It wants to go for a substantive view of values, not just a procedural view. Traditional approach goes for procedural view, but modern approach goes for substantial view of values. Modern approach also considers politics as system. It considers states as a system. Okay. So this is how we compare based on modern approach. Now let's apply modern approach to the comparative politics between India and China, we will get new insights into reality. Through traditional approach, we were not able to obtain too many insights because liberal democracy is already taken as a benchmark. So here we conclude that India's democracy is the real democracy, or we can say it is definitely the better form of democracy. And China's democracy, even though called people democracy, is not real democracy. Okay. Now let's take modern approach. Modern approach takes into account processes, result, substantive view, and looks at politics and state as system. Okay. Now let's compare India and China. India is seen as a better democracy or the real democracy. But in India, political equality and political democracy is better guaranteed. For example, rights, liberty are better guaranteed. There is a list of guaranteed rights within the Indian Constitution called fundamental rights. They guarantee rights to people, they guarantee liberty to the people, it guarantees political equality to the people. So all people in India are equal before law, regardless of sex, religion, caste and other identities. Now come to the other form of democracy. It is economic democracy. Do we have economic democracy in India? This is a big question. Compared to China, economic democracy is very poor in India. What is economic democracy? Economic democracy should aim for economic equality. India has great economic inequality compared to China and many other countries. So, in traditional approach, we saw democracy only as political democracy because we have already taken liberal democracy as a value and as a standard. But when you look into the process, when you look into the substantive values, if you look into the results, when you take all these into account under modern approach, we have to answer other questions. Economic democracy poor in India compared to China, but political democracy much better compared to China without any doubt. India's economic system is a mixture of socialism and capitalism. It has borrowed from both the philosophies, socialism and capitalism. The resultant system is mixed economy. India is a welfare state. The welfare state takes a responsibility for the socio-economic welfare of the people. It provides various support schemes to the people to develop their economic condition and to ensure equality. Even though these processes are seen in Indian democracy, yet economic democracy is poor in India. Still, nearly 30 crore people are living below the poverty line. So, when you go for modern approach, Indian democracy itself can be called as not a complete democracy or a real democracy. Okay. Now, let's go to the other side, China. China, through traditional approach, is not seen as a democracy. Okay? It is a socialist state. State is in control of production. State owns everything in China almost. This is the traditional view of China. Chinese government is an authoritarian government. Authoritarian government rules with iron hand. Rights and liberties are strictly curtailed. So we naturally see China as an authoritarian state and not a democracy. Okay, now we will apply the modern approach. In China, political equality is poor because it is authoritarian, It does not provide complete rights and liberty. China has killed its own citizens in the past. Leaders like Mao, they brought in schemes like Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution to develop the economy. They went for forced labor of the people. China was affected by famine, diseases. Many people suffered. Many people died in China. So, what do you understand? China does not have political equality when compared with India. India is far better when it comes to political equality, but China is not. It is an authoritarian state. Single party, Communist Party of China rules the country. Dissent is not encouraged. Press is not allowed to function freely. So people don't have complete rights and liberty. Okay. Even during elections, other parties are just allowed to take part nominally. They don't have real democracy. So other parties may be taking part, but ultimately Communist Party of China will always win. But when you come to the other side of democracy, it is economic democracy, which has economic equality. Here, China is much better compared to India. In economic democracy, India is poor, China is much better. The economic system followed by China is socialism. Historical system, traditional system, socialism. But after 1980, China has gone for modification of socialism. It has not modified socialism, but it has slightly modified socialism. It has added some capitalist features in socialism. The resultant system is called market socialism. But even then, socialism is a predominant economic system in China. Now, socialism provides economic democracy in China. Economic equality is much better in China. Inequalities are very less in China compared to India. So, when you look at the other process in democracy, China is better compared to India. You cannot buy land in China. You can easily buy land in India. This is a main contributor to economic inequality in India. In China, there is only usufructuary rights. You can use land for rent or you can take land for lease. Ownership of land is given only under certain conditions. You see this where? You see this in China. Most of the industries are under state control in China. So the state control has worked better in case of China. As a result, China was able to bring many people out of poverty after 1980. Till 1980, India and China were almost in the same economic status. But today, China is much ahead of India because it has gone for economic democracy. It has used socialism to the fullest extent. Some states have failed in socialism. That's a different matter of discussion. But China has practically used socialism. Today, it has modified socialism leading to market socialism. Got it? Now, the modern approach has given us new answers. Using modern approach, we are able to study reality better. Earlier, we simply concluded that India was a real democracy and China, even though called people democracy through the constitution, is not a real democracy. But when we use modern approach, we take into account results, we take into account substantive values. Am I correct? We take into account processes. When you take all these into account, we are able to study reality better. We are able to arrive at conclusions better. Using this, we can further go for a proper contextual study of political science. So this is comparison between India and China based on the philosophy as well as the system called democracy. We can even compare India and China with respect to the philosophy and system federalism. So now let's take federalism as a variable for comparison. We will take federalism and we will now compare India and China. India studied through the traditional approach of comparative politics is immediately identified as a federal country. Am I correct? Traditional approach takes into account institutions, takes into account constitution, philosophy. So India is a federal country, it follows federalism. Okay. What is the degree of federalism is a separate matter of discussion. Let's not go into it as of now. So it is federal. China, seen through the traditional approach, is unitary. Am I correct? This is the traditional comparison. What is unitary? In the unitary system, the state has one single government for the state as a whole. It is the union government or the central government. One government for the country as such. China has one government at the top. It does not have governments for the provinces or the regions. In contrast, India has a government for the state as a whole. It is called federal government or union government or central government. Okay, so this government sits at Delhi. So this is the national government at the top. Below this government, there are sub-national governments for the states in India. The states in India have their own governments. Haryana, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Madhya Pradesh, Punjab and so on. So this setup is called federalism. When you look at federalism institutionally, constitutionally, we can easily arrive that India is federal and China is unitary. Now let's apply the modern approach. Modern approach takes into account process, results, values substantially. Now let's apply the modern approach. You will now find out that even though India is federal, the power is tilted more in favor of the center. Okay. So the India's federalism is not on the lines of the American federalism where states have more power, but in India the center has more power. So we can say that there is a unitary bias in Indian federalism. Am I correct? Because you are now comparing the process, you are now comparing the values substantially. Now you are able to study reality better. You find out that India has federalism, but here there is bias towards the center. Center enjoys more power. Now come to China. Traditional approach told that China is unitary and not federal. But if you look at the devolution of power in China, China devolves power to the regions. The regions Xinjiang and Tibet. Xinjiang, Tibet, they are called autonomous regions. They are called autonomous. These are just two examples. There are other regions as well. Autonomous regions are provided autonomy by China. Even though they come under the control of the central government at the top, they are given autonomy for self-governance. Now what do you understand? When you look at the process, China is not federal, it is only unitary. But it is also devolving power, it is also sharing power. It has given independence to the regions like Xinjiang and Tibet to take decisions in some areas on their own. Apart from this, China also provides autonomy to some other regions. They are called PSIR, Special Administrative Regions. There are two such regions in China. One is Hong Kong and the other is Macau. They can be compared to the union territories in India. Once again, China devolves power. Hong Kong has its own legislative assembly. Hong Kong and Macau enjoy the greatest degree of autonomy within China, but they come directly under the central government. They have autonomy, maximum autonomy, but are directly coming under the central government of China ruled by the Communist Party. Now what do you infer using the modern approach? In China, you see power devolution. In India, there is federalism by principle, there is power devolution, but power devolution is not that great, right? So it is very dynamic, is it not? China not federal, but it is also devolving power. India federal, but not devolving powerfully. Okay, so we can arrive at a conclusion that even though China is unitary, it devolves power to a substantial extent. It also has systems called autonomous regions and special administrative regions. If you use the traditional model of federalism, we are not able to understand the reality. But if you go for the modern approach, you are able to see the realities. Autonomous regions and special administrative regions are concepts specific to China. Okay, friends, I hope you have now understood the practical scope of comparative politics within political science. Today, what we need is not the traditional approach but the modern approach of comparative politics, which gives us answers, which helps us better study reality. This will be helpful for scholars of political science to predict the future also better. Thank you very much.